with antifreeze to avoid paying child support. So here we have the story of a man named Curtis Jack. Curtis was working for Delta Airlines when he met his co-worker, a woman he would soon get into an intimate relationship with. After a while, the woman became pregnant. Curtis, though, wasn't going to stand for it. Immediately after finding out, he began to urge her to terminate the pregnancy, but she refused. He continued to beg her to do it for the remainder of the pregnancy. Regardless, the baby was born in September of 2020, exactly 9 months after their first romp. Well, now that Curtis was way past the point of terminating the pregnancy, he was left with one other worry. He didn't want to pay child support. He didn't want to get with the mother and wasn't about to pay any money, so he came up with a different plan. He collected bottles of breast milk set aside for the baby by the mother while she was in the hospital. There he made his little witch's brew by putting in a dose of antifreeze into the milk before sending it off to his new daughter's grandmother. The grandmother gave the little girl some milk and, within 24 hours, the child was critically ill. She was rushed to the hospital where she tested positive for ethylene glycol, a chemical found in antifreeze. As I'm sure a lot of you know, consuming even a tiny amount of antifreeze can be extremely toxic. More than likely, it will cause vomiting within a few moments. In more severe cases, it can lead to kidney damage and even death. Curtis became the main suspect pretty quickly and was taken in for questioning, during which he admitted to adding antifreeze to the milk pretty quickly. He told them it was all done in order to avoid paying child support. It goes without saying that the case went to trial soon enough. During the trial, there were testimonies from the mother, the grandmother, law enforcement, and even medical experts who demonstrated how easy it would have been to poison the milk. The South Fulton County Police Sergeant, a man named Dickerson, said, "It hit home because it was an 18-day-old baby. It's beyond getting a confession. We still have to prove that someone committed the crime. You still have to prove that the person is guilty." And find him guilty they did. They found Curtis Jack guilty on all counts, one of which was attempted murder. He was sentenced to serve 40 years in prison. Luckily, the baby is doing perfectly fine now after some medical care. This one reads, "Son busted after elderly mother found fused to bedsheet covered in feces and maggots." This all started when a concerned neighbor called the police to perform a welfare check on their neighbors who they hadn't seen in months, a man and his mother. Given that packages were piling up at their door and no one was answering when they knocked, they felt that something was likely very wrong. The occupants of the home were a 51-year-old man named Daniel Klein and his elderly mother. Neither of them had been seen in quite a long time before the police came to perform their check. When doing so, they knocked on the door and rang the doorbell to no avail. Getting no answer, they decided to walk around to the back of the home and look through the sliding glass windows. There, they could clearly see heaps of trash all over the floor and a disgusting amount of flies swarming about. Fearing that someone was in a dire situation or even dead, the police forced their way into the home. They were immediately hit with a pungent odor, one that they felt could likely be the stench of death. Once inside, though, the police were surprised to come across Daniel, alive and well. They asked him to take him to where his mother was in order to check on her too. While making their way throughout the home, they came across more and more trash and bugs. Daniel told them that his mother was sleeping at the moment, but they were free to check on her. They found her lying in a bed under a disgusting, soiled blanket. To their relief, though, she was alive, but she was unconscious. However, they were relieved to see that she was at least breathing. Paramedics were called to take her to the hospital. When the medics arrived, they removed the nasty blanket and found that the woman's entire lower half was covered in dried poop and maggots. They said that her toenails resembled, quote, ram's horns. When trying to take her, they found that she was actually fused to the bed and couldn't be moved. Eventually, they were able to cut her out and take her to the hospital, where she was found to be in critical condition. Daniel told the police that he was his mother's only caretaker and that she hadn't wanted to get out of bed for 3 to 4 weeks, but the police suspect it was likely for months. Daniel Klein was charged with abusing a dependent person and reckless endangerment while his mother remains in critical condition in the hospital. The Delaware County District Attorney told news outlets, "This is one of the worst cases I've seen in my 4 years as district attorney here. And for this person, the defendant Klein, to do this to his own mother is just... I can't even imagine." Daniel has remained at the George Hill Correctional Facility as he is unable to pay his $50,000 bail. He's due back in court any time now. Now we've got parole board misses a man who fatally stabbed 11-year-old boy less than 24 hours later. A 37-year-old man named Tetris Brand was serving 16 years behind bars for home invasion and aggravated assault when a judge decided to hold a hearing for his possible parole on March 13th. Tetris had originally been paroled in October before being reassessed shortly after when he threatened a woman over text. Both the judge and Tetris were expected to attend this new hearing, with the latter being informed while he was still in prison. However, for some reason, the parole board chair, Leanne Miller, decided to write a report that approved his parole on the 12th, one day before the court. Tetris Brand hopped out of jail and, in less than 24 hours, made his way up to the home of Lataria Smith and her son. Tetris ambushed them both and stabbed them in the doorway of their home, injuring Lataria with a stab wound to the chest and murdering her 11-year-old son, Jaden. It soon came to light that Lataria had actually begged for an order of protection against Tetris in the months leading up to this. This sparked national outrage, as not only was the order of protection not even a factor in his parole, nothing was done to prevent him from attacking the woman and her son. The chair of the Illinois Prisoner Review Board, Donald Shelter, along with the board member, Leanne Miller, who signed the papers, received heavy backlash for their random decision to grant Tetris parole in the first place. The two soon decided to resign. Both the Illinois Department of Corrections and the Illinois Prisoner Review Board claimed that they didn't know anything about the protection order, but emails leaked that showed they did. So, the agency stated, "The department sincerely apologizes for any confusion its previous statement may have caused." Now, Tetris Brand is facing a murder charge along with a whole load of other charges, one of which is violation of a protection order. This is hardly even the first time this has ever happened, and that brings us to this next case. This case is, fiend who punched 9-year-old girl at Grand Central in unprovoked attack says he hit her because he was thirsty. A man named John Carlos Zaruzella was arrested on April 4th for punching a woman multiple times, leaving her with a bloody nose and a black eye. He was arrested that very day and was arraigned on assault, reckless endangerment, and harassment charges. It wasn't long before his bail was set. With the police unable to hold him due to recent bail reforms, he was released shortly after on April 9th. Prosecutors have to have what they call good cause to hold someone for longer than 5 days on misdemeanor charges, so they had to let him go. Jean was no stranger to this process, as he had a long history of other arrests. In fact, he was on supervised release from prison just 1 year prior. Well, the exact same day he was released, on April 9th, Jean walked up to a random 9-year-old girl at Grand Central Terminal and punched her right in the face. He then attempted to assault another person while security was called. While he tried to flee, the police came out and took him into custody. He told the police that he had punched the little girl because he was thirsty. Well, he was arrested again, and this time he was given a $100,000 bail. He told the detectives, "I hit the girl in the face because I was thirsty. Maybe I hit her in the face by accident." The little girl was taken to the NYU Langone Tisch Hospital following the attack. She is expected to recover. Jean Carlos Zarzuela is now facing 2 charges of third-degree assault, endangering the welfare of a child, third-degree attempted assault, and second-degree harassment. He has been ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. He's all set to be back in court soon enough. Now we've got, crazed woman shoots random drivers on Florida interstate because God told her to via the solar eclipse. There wasn't any way we were going to get through this recent eclipse without hearing some pretty crazy stories, and well, that blessed us with a Florida woman story of all things. A 22-year-old woman named Talon Nichelle Celestine was staying at a motel in Holmes County on the day of the eclipse. This was when she told motel staff that God had spoken to her and given her the order to go on a shooting spree during the eclipse. This was despite the fact that Florida is located nowhere near where the eclipse actually took place, and she wouldn't even be seeing it. Regardless, she hopped into her purple Dodge Challenger and drove out onto Interstate 10. She rolled her window down and began to fire at random cars in Washington County. She shot at one passing car several times. The driver of this car was grazed by one of the bullets on his arm and was hit with glass shards when his window shattered. He pulled over to the shoulder of the highway, but Talon kept driving. She kept driving west on Interstate 10, armed with both a 9mm handgun and an AR-15. She soon opened fire on another passing vehicle. That driver was actually hit in the neck and later rushed to the hospital. Talon continued driving until the highway patrol managed to catch up to her and pull her over. She told the police simply that she did what she did because God had told her to do it. They searched her car, recovering both her rifle and her handgun. Talon was taken into the Holmes County Jail. There, she was booked on charges of attempted murder, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, and improper discharge of a firearm. As of now, the police aren't really sure which gun she was using to do the majority of the shooting. They also aren't sure whether or not her guns were obtained legally. Given that this is very recent, the investigation is still ongoing. And now we've got fiancé of man killed in staged robbery speaks out. Alright, I cut this headline down a little bit from what it originally said because honestly it just makes an already confusing case just that much more confusing. It's really hard to describe why this one is so weird without telling it, so let's get into it. In January in Houston, a 22-year-old man named Rashaud Scott decided to participate in a little master plan to get a visa for a few people so they could stay in the United States. Apparently, there's a thing called the U visa. According to the Department of Homeland Security, a U visa is granted to victims of certain crimes to aid law enforcement in solving cases. It grants the victim temporary immigration status, including work authorization, temporary immigration status for qualifying family members of the victim, and the possibility of lawful permanent resident status. So basically they can stay in the country if they're currently aiding law enforcement in some way. 2 foreign nationals decided that they would abuse this method. In order to do so, they decided to stage a robbery. This is where the man behind the whole scheme, William X. Winfrey, decided to pay Rashaud Scott to pretend to rob them. Then the fake victims would get to be a part of the investigation. They would pretend to aid the police in solving that robbery and get this visa. In reality, William and Rashaud had actually done this twice before in order to get U visas for several other people. As I'm sure a lot of you can gauge, as they coordinated the fake robberies. They found out that they had committed an almost identical fake robbery in order to get some U visas for some other people the night before. In that case, they had actually already succeeded in getting a visa for one of those fake victims. In another case from a year prior, they had managed to get 4 visas for some others. Due to setting this whole thing up, William X. Winfrey is now being charged with murder. Rashaud's wife is now left to raise their 2 kids by herself. She, surprisingly, of all things, blames lax gun laws on what happened that night. She said, "He didn't deserve what happened to him at all. He was making a dumb decision. I'm not defending him, of course, but he didn't deserve to die. Somebody still lost a life at the end of the day. Have some decorum." She added, "It would have eventually caught up to him and he would have had to learn the hard way. He just took him out. He didn't get the chance to fix his mistakes." She also wants to see Jesus Varga put in jail, saying that he is the one who made the decision to kill. The police, though, haven't decided whether or not they're going to charge Jesus at all. By this point, there aren't any records that show he has been. There also aren't any records showing whether or not the fake victims have been charged with anything either. And this one is, priest is jailed after refusing to open the door to an ambulance during his gay orgy during which a man overdosed on erectile pills. Here's a truly bizarre story that starts out in an apartment in Dąbrowa Górnicza in Poland. This is where a priest, Father Thomas Zmarzli from the Church of the Blessed Virgin Mary of the Angels, along with his clergy, were hosting a little party. According to those close to the people involved, quote, "The event was organized by clergy and was purely sexual. Its participants took potency pills." In the early hours of the morning, a male prostitute had taken a lot of boner popper pills and got a little bit sick. Well, a lot bit sick. He was kicked out, taken outside the apartment and placed on the ground outside while an ambulance was called. The ambulances soon arrived, finding the unconscious man and calling the police. The problem is, they tried to open the door to talk to the people inside the apartment. Father Zmarzli refused to let any of them in. Luckily, the sick man managed to get some medical attention if his erection lasted for more than 4 hours and made a full recovery. Eventually, he discharged himself from the hospital and went home on his own. Well, the police didn't take too kindly to Father Zmarzli refusing to answer any questions. He was eventually arrested on charges of various sexual offenses, supplying drugs, and failing to provide assistance to a person in danger of loss of life or serious bodily harm. The father denied that he had been holding a gay orgy to his superiors, but all of the evidence showed otherwise. After a trial, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison for his crimes. He was also ordered to pay the equivalent of $3,820 to the victim in compensation, along with a little bit more to contribute to a charity benefiting victims of similar crimes. Being the kind of trial it was held behind closed doors. It seems that the decisions are final and there won't be any sort of appeal. The priest was let go from his clergy after this case hit the media. This one is a doozy. Man arrested for allegedly rubbing his buttocks against water tap at Tokyo Park. Well, this is a story that pretty well explains itself with the headline alone, but here we go. The police out in the Suginami ward of Tokyo were informed that a strange man was giving himself a little action by rubbing his booty hole all over the tap of a water fountain in a park. After they were called, they managed to find the suspect, a 56-year-old man riding around in Setagaya on a bicycle with his lower half exposed for all to see. When he was caught, he told the police that this was all done in order to satisfy his sexual desires. He told them that he had used binoculars to make sure nobody was around before he did what he did in order not to expose anyone. The police, searching his phone, found a picture of him rubbing his anus all over the water fountain. So he was arrested on suspicion of property damage. They also found a picture of him completely naked in a public park and hit him with charges of public indecency as well. The park turned off the water fountain and blocked it off from use. They're planning to just throw it out and replace it entirely. This one is Sierra Leone declares emergency over drug Kush, made from human bones. So this is probably the worst drug I've ever heard of since Jankum. They're calling it Kush, but it's very likely not the kind of Kush that you're thinking of. This is more like something straight out of Resident Evil. This case comes up because just recently, the president of Sierra Leone, a country in West Africa, has declared a national emergency because so many people are using the new drug. Kush is described as a psychoactive blend of addictive substances, but it's the ingredients that make it truly terrifying. It includes cannabis to start, but quickly gets more out of hand, also including fentanyl, tramadol, formaldehyde, and real ground-up human bones. Interestingly enough, the drug would have the same effect without the bones, leading people to wonder why the bones are even included at all. In fact, due to the sheer amount of people stealing human bones to make the drug, cemeteries have been forced to tighten up their security within the past few years as people kept getting caught stealing entire skeletons. The president has called the drug a death trap, saying that it posed an all-out existential crisis for the country. The drug causes people to fall asleep or pass out while up and about, causing them to fall over and injure themselves, some even ending up dying. Some space out so badly that they wander out into traffic and get hit by cars. Plenty of people are helplessly addicted and, although there isn't an official death toll, it is said to at least be in the high hundreds within just the last few months. The president said in a nationwide broadcast, "Our country is currently faced with an existential threat due to the ravaging impact of drugs and substance abuse, particularly the devastating synthetic drug Kush." He also said that the fatality rate has been steadily rising and only growing worse. He directed officials to set up a task force specifically to deal with the drug. Centers are to be put up in every district with trained staff dealing with addiction symptoms. However, as of right now, the only drug rehab center in the entire country is in Freetown, and it has an occupancy limit of only a few hundred. The facility has been described as less than adequate, with it being compared to more of a holding area than a rehab center. Law enforcement agencies have also been pressured to dismantle the supply chain of the drugs and arrest anyone involved in production or distribution. The police are also now told to crack down much harder on grave robbers. Police have been stationed to watch over cemeteries at night, especially those without fencing. Citizens have criticized the president, saying that, despite his good intentions, he isn't qualified for the job and lacks the drive to keep pursuing the issue. The whole thing has resulted in normal citizens taking the law into their own hands to deal with the issues. Right now, it has been said that roughly 2/3 of patients in some hospitals within the country are there only for Kush-related problems. As of the making of this video, the problem does not seem to be slowing down. Now we've got Iowa witch burns stranger's porch after no one answers door. Here we have the story of who has been called the Iowa witch lately. This woman, 46-year-old Michelle Young, apparently really wanted to talk to a certain friend. She came up to a stranger's home at 4:30 p.m. and stood on the porch, knocking and waiting for a response 3 times. However, nobody answered any of her knocks. So naturally, she decided to set their house on fire by burning a bunch of clothes and other items on the porch. According to later statements, she said that she had been under the impression that her friend was living at this random home at the time, which it seems she wasn't. She stood in front of the house as the fire raged, remaining there, motionless, until firefighters arrived. Luckily, they were able to put the fire out fairly quickly and the house didn't suffer any major damage. The police were called and Michelle frankly admitted to setting the fire, saying that she had scooped up some miscellaneous items on the ground over a period of 2 hours in order to get some kindling for the arson. She told the police that she was a witch herself and she had seen a novelty sign on the home saying "Witches Welcome," assuming it was meant for her. The whole thing was caught on the homeowner's security cameras, so she wouldn't have been able to deny it anyway. In her mugshot, Michelle has a great big grin and wild hair, definitely going for the most insane look she possibly could. The owner of the home has said that she didn't know Michelle and had never seen her before. Michelle has said that she didn't intend to hurt anyone and would have stopped the fire before it got too out of control. Given that she also had a crack pipe, she was charged with reckless use of fire and possession of drug paraphernalia. She's being held on a $5,000 cash-only bond. And this one B. Man in wheelchair goes on stabbing spree in Queens. Out in Queens in New York City, a 31-year-old wheelchair-bound man named Kareem Phillips decided to go on a killing spree on the city streets. One Saturday at around noon, he set out with a knife to stab as many people as he could. He rolled over and stabbed one 56-year-old man in the back. This man was able to scramble away into a friend's house where he called 911. Then Kareem moved over to a 69-year-old woman and chased her in his chair. He punched her in the face, knocking her to the ground, and ended by stabbing her in the torso. Others on the streets called the police and filmed the action as it took place. Soon after, Kareem moved on and stabbed a 35-year-old man in his chest. That man then walked over to the hospital himself. And then finally, Kareem stabbed one more 46-year-old woman in her forearm. 5 officers arrived shortly after and surrounded Kareem. They came to find him swinging 2 different kitchen knives around, one of which he threw at an officer. He was taken into police custody and indicted on 2 counts of attempted murder along with various other crimes, mainly charges of assault and weapon possession. He's facing up to 65 years in prison if convicted. Luckily, all of the victims' injuries were non-life-threatening and they were able to be treated at local hospitals shortly after. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you want, go ahead and give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and hey, feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I now have a podcast set up with 4 of my friends, Brugly, Knight, Raymundo, and Fox Akimbo. Go ahead and check that out, it's pretty entertaining, I think. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media, because if anything would ever happen to this channel, that would be the only way you'd ever hear about it. I also really appreciate when people follow me on Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are back up too, and you can get the same benefits there as well. This has been your host, Kyle. Thank you, and good night.
My butt's smoking, man.
Well, I threw Levi out of the house by his hair. The girls went out the window. My eyes were burnt shut. It felt like somebody hit me in the face with 5 baseball bats at the same time. I could be sitting 2 feet from you, and you're not there. You're not there. You are not there. And it was pink elephants flying.
You are not able to tell the truth right now. I need to put on a show to make it so nobody knows it happened. Showtime.
911, what's location of your emergency?
Yes, I live at 885 Yale Farm Road.
Okay.
I think I need an ambulance.
Okay, what's going on?
The truck fell on my stepson.
The truck fell on your stepson?
Yes, and we just got home, and I don't think he's alive.
You don't think he's alive?
No, 885.
Okay, he's pinned underneath the truck?
Yeah, my husband's lifting up the truck. Honestly, I don't think he's alive.
Okay, how old is your son?
He's 22.
And did your husband get the truck off of him?
He was jacking it up when I was just out there.
Okay, are you with your son right now?
He's not alive.
Is he breathing?
No.
He is not breathing. Okay.
No.
Okay, we're going to start CPR, okay?
Yeah, Carl, they want to start CPR. Do you know CPR? His chest is crushed.
His chest is crushed?
No. He's probably been under here for hours. Oh my God.
All right, what is your first name?
Cindy.
Cindy?
C-I-N-D-Y.
Okay, and your last name is Carlson?
Carlson. Oh my God. This is awful.
The 911 call you just heard was placed after Levi Carlson's stepmother discovered his lifeless body in the barn. He'd been performing repairs under his dad's old truck when it suddenly collapsed, effectively crushing every last remnant of life right out of him. 4 years later, in the interrogation room, years of unbelievable secrets would be revealed, exposing a story so shocking, you'll have to see it to believe it. What investigators would soon uncover was more twisted than they ever could have imagined, reaching much further than the tragic accident in his garage. The majority of the following interrogation footage has never been seen before. Carl Carlson had joined the Air Force and was stationed at the Grand Forks Air Force Base, located in North Dakota during the early 80s. Over the years, he headed a variety of failed business endeavors, including raising horses and a gourmet duck breeding venture. According to his older brother, Carl was never skilled when it came to money management. Of course, this claim will take on a whole new meaning later. In 1983, he married Christina Alexander, and together the couple had 3 children, 2 daughters and 1 son, Levi. That marriage ended in disaster. Carl would marry again in 1993, this time to a woman named Cindy Best. The two met at a line dancing event in Seneca Falls, and they fell in love after Carl told her the tragic tale of his life. More on that later. However, it was the collapse of this second marriage that would eventually lead to Carl's arrest in 2012, 4 years after Levi's death in 2008. Carl was intercepted by Lieutenant John Clear and Detective Thomas Crowley outside a local restaurant in the town of Ovid, New York, where they asked him to accompany them to the sheriff's office to answer some questions, and Carl agreed. Upon arrival just a few minutes later, Carl was led to an interrogation room where the questioning would commence. As the following interrogation unfolds, the story only gets crazier with each new revelation. The detective starts by directing Carl to sit in the chair that's furthest from the door so he feels trapped in the room and ill at ease. The room is intentionally bland with nothing in it but chairs and a table. This is done to reduce distractions and make it feel like an unfamiliar and uncomfortable environment to add to the suspect's stress. The suspect then relies on the interrogators to ease the stress or amp it up as they need to in order to get the truth out of them. If you're a frequent viewer, you may have noticed that the arrangement of suspects and interrogators in the rooms is not always the same. Different interrogators use different strategies depending on their own training, the rooms, the suspects themselves, or if they have safety concerns. However, the way they stage the room and where they have the suspects sit is almost always intentional, for one purpose or another.
Your daughter's a police officer, right?
Yeah.
So you know about your Miranda rights?
Oh, yeah.
The detective mentions they know his daughter is a police officer to put on record the fact that he's likely familiar with Miranda rights and police procedure, or at least more so than the average person may be. Then he proceeds to read Carl his Miranda warnings. In the years following Levi's death, Cindy, Levi's stepmother, started to become suspicious that perhaps his death wasn't an accident, but something far more sinister. In fact, Cindy was so concerned that she began having panic attacks. She knew she had to devise a plan to uncover the truth. It was while watching a true crime show that she had an idea. She decided to secretly record Carl and see if she could get him to confess. First, she told Carl they should separate for a while, and she moved out. Then she told him that the only way she'd get back together with him is if he was honest with her about everything that happened throughout their marriage. Carl agreed, not knowing that Cindy was recording. But her plan would go terribly wrong. The pair met at a restaurant, and to Cindy's shock, Carl confirmed her suspicions and confessed to Levi's murder. However, after she took her recording to the sheriff's office, she realized Carl's voice couldn't be heard on the tape. Still, her suspicion led investigators to reassess the case. They asked her to record him again, this time wearing a wire. Cindy agreed, though she worried that she'd already blown her chance and that Carl may have been tipped off. Not only was she concerned that he wouldn't confess again, but that he might even try to kill her. Regardless, the pair met again at a restaurant, and Cindy's worst fears were confirmed. Carl changed his story.
You're sorry about it, right?
Every minute.
Okay, Carl, and I asked you if you pushed the truck, and you said yes.
I didn't push the truck, I said I had nothing to do, but I said I took advantage of the situation once it happened.
In a transcript of the conversation, Carl says that while Levi was working on the truck, he went into the barn and inched it up and then it slid. She slid back and zoom.
I took advantage of the situation once it happened.
It was never planned from day one to go that way, from the time we did the insurance. Most chillingly, Carl said of his son, if it did happen, he's done things in life. Now Carl sits in the interrogation room, and in 3 seconds, he'll begin to describe the disturbing events of that day, and things will quickly escalate as the interrogation continues.
Okay, you guys don't know what happened that day.
Tell us about it.
The day that my son died.
Mm-hmm.
Her and I, we had a funeral to go to. Left at 11:30, 11:45, somewhere like that. It was on the other side of Seneca Lake. Son was there.
Notice the way Carl says son was there. It's as if he's checking an item off a list. It seems very distant and highly impersonal. He didn't say my son, nor did he show any emotion or sadness at mentioning Levi.
He helped me. We were working on the truck, changing the transmission lines, brake lines, the whole 9 yards. Talked to him, said goodbye. He was going to work on his truck later in the afternoon because he had to change something. I can't remember what it was. So then we left, come back a little after 4, and went out there and found it.
Carl's story sounds very rehearsed. This may be because he's recited it numerous times to police before, or because he has a timeline of events or an alibi that he's created and is sticking to. The casual and emotionless way Carl discusses how he found his son dead is disturbing and a major red flag of guilt. No matter how many times a parent says those words, one would expect it to bring up emotions or sadness.
Did you say anything before you left?
Just see you later and thanks, or what, just...
So you had gone out to the car with your wife, and then you went into the barn?
Yep, because I forgot to give him the money.
Did you give him the money?
Yep, $50 bill.
Carl would pay Levi with Mountain Dew and whatever cash he had on him, whenever he would work on the truck.
And then what happened? What else happened?
And then I left. Because he was in front of the bumper.
Was the radio on at that time?
Yep.
What was it playing?
I don't know.
Okay. And then what happens?
And then I left.
You left with Cindy to go where?
To her aunt, I believe it was, to the reception, just a short time. Then we got back at it was after 4. I went out in the garage, and because we were surprised he was still there. If the truck is this way, he was laying this way. Mm-hmm. And then I went in, yelled, banging on the door, and told her to call ambulance, and started jacking it up, and she come out. There's no doubt about, the only jack that was there was the big railroad jack, which is my father's. And it was an old one that they used to use way back when, I guess, what we were told, is it lifted up the old railroad irons. They come in, tried doing CPR, and he was already gone. And they said he had died right around 1 or 2 o'clock. It's right on the death certificate and all that stuff. And I asked him, I said, and it's a question you hate to ask, but it's like...
Well, let me tell you, let me stop you right there.
The detective's trying to get him to stop denying the actual time of death of his son, which is at a time that likely exculpates him. This is a step of the Reed technique. Letting the suspect deny their guilt will increase their confidence, so the interrogator tries to interrupt all denials.
What we know to be true is you pushed that car over, right?
I did not.
Well, the only thing that remains to be found out is what the reasons were.
Here, the detective uses the first step of the Reed technique called positive confrontation. The interrogator presents the facts of the case and informs the suspect of the evidence against them, implying in a confident manner that the suspect is involved in the crime. The suspect's stress level increases, and the interrogator may move around the room, invading the suspect's personal space to increase the discomfort.
No,
You know, here's the thing. You confessed to your wife.
I lied to my wife.
If that were the case, why would he confess to a murder he allegedly didn't commit? It makes no logical sense.
You have her wired? And be honest with me.
Yes, we do.
I thought you did.
It's all recorded.
It seems Carl has quite a hole to dig himself out of at this point.
You make difficult decisions, and the fact of the matter is you did what most people would want to do, but don't have a
I don't
chance to
understand
do
what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is exactly what you told your wife. Your son, unfortunately, was flawed, like everybody else. And just like you told your wife on multiple times that you did what you had to do, you took an opportunity to benefit your family.
The detective is trying to align himself with Carl and normalize what he did to his son as a way to make Carl feel more comfortable and, therefore, more likely to talk.
You cannot now take those words back. You can't do that. It doesn't benefit your family. It's completely against your character, and it doesn't help you any. You were at your finest moment when you are making decisions to benefit your family.
He's developing a theme, which is another step in the Reed method. The proposed theme is that Carl killed his son to benefit his family, and that he confessed because he's a good person.
They call that murder.
I never called that murder.
I do.
That's what you're nervous about now.
No,
You're afraid that you did the right thing, and now you're sitting here saying, "Oh my God, I'm trying to help my family, and now I'm in trouble."
Okay, what do you call it?
We want to find out what's in your heart so we know what to call it.
I would call that murder.
Why don't you talk to us about what really happened? And then we'll tell you what to call it.
I would call that murder.
The theme is not one Carl is latching onto, as he knows that in society, it's not morally justifiable or legal to kill for money, even if it helps your family out. Many psychopaths understand what society deems acceptable. They just don't follow those rules.
You don't kill your son. You don't kill anybody for money.
Listen, who said anything about money? What are you talking about?
Both detectives feign surprise when Carl mentions money as the possible motive, stating that they never said anything about money. The money Carl is referring to is Levi's life insurance policy, a hefty sum of $707,000.
And nobody thinks because of what happened to Levi that you're any less of a person. I actually think in my heart that I have children, and it must have been the most difficult thing in the world. But you were able to do it, and I'm not saying it's right. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying that you made a difficult decision, and now you have to live with that decision.
Instead of saying he murdered his son, the detective is portraying it as a difficult decision Carl made to try to get him to start talking about it.
I'm not asking you. I'm telling you what we know to be true that came out of your own words. You pushed the car over on your son. You said it. We've heard it. It's a matter of evidence, along with several other things that will prove the same thing. Do not make yourself look like a monster. You did what was in your heart, and now you're trying to pull back because you're now, for the first time in your life, you're worried about you. Before you worried about your family. Now you're actually worried about yourself.
About me.
Is that right?
I've always been worried about me is the exact thought process of a psychopath. They worry about their own needs above all else. Me first, me second, and me last. Psychopaths view people as a means to get what they want. Levi was a means for Carl to get money, nothing more.
You're worried about you now when you should be worried about your family.
Well, the only one in my family right now is me.
The detective knows Carl only worries about himself, and this is all just a ploy to get him to discuss committing the murder.
Now, you said something about money. I don't believe that. I don't believe that you did anything for money. I don't believe that for 1 second, because there's no amount of money that can make that worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
But you brought up money. Did you do anything like this for money?
No.
Okay, then.
Notice how Carl shifts.